Hi YouTube, Laura here. Welcome to my channel, Aquamarine18. I have not been on for about a month, which was totally unintentional on my part, but I work in education. It's end of semester, it's exam season, which means it's grading season for me, so I've been extremely busy. So now that I have some time to myself, with the house to myself, I thought I would pop on quickly with a very, I think, short video about the newest deck to my collection, which is the Steampunk Tarot by Barbara Moore and illustrated by Ali Fell, and it's the Czech language version of the deck. So a little kind of background on this deck to begin with. I had wanted to work with the Steampunk Tarot for quite a long time. It had always been a deck that had been on my radar, something I would like to work with. It's been on my Amazon wish list for who knows how long, but with it being a kind of very readily accessible deck, widely available, it just never kind of came to a point where I just clicked through to purchase the deck, despite it probably having been on my wish list longer than most others, I guess. Without that kind of sense of urgency that comes with a limited edition or something like this, it never happened. So I've been interested in the Steampunk Tarot for a long time because I think that steampunk is really cool. I first got interested in steampunk as a kind of style, genre, with a book that's probably familiar for steampunk fans for sure, and the book is The Difference Engine by William Gibson and Bruce Sterling. And this book has a lot of the kind of hallmarks of steampunk as a genre, as a style. It's a really turning point book in the development of steampunk, which for folks who don't know is a genre of literature and other arts, I guess, and media, which, like the name suggests, feature societies in which steam-powered machinery and steam-powered engines and so on are prominent and used in the social context of the society. So a lot of the steampunk texts, like this one, The Difference Engine, are a kind of alternative history in which steam power became and remained the dominant form of power used in the given society. So they also often kind of contain contemporary kind of inventions, right? But in steam-powered mechanical versions. So just from the back of The Difference Engine, the first kind of lines in the description of the book on the back, 1855, the Industrial Revolution is in full swing, powered by steam-driven cybernetic engines. Right? Charles Babbage perfects his analytical engine, and the computer age arrives a century ahead of its time. So there's a computer age set in 1855 onwards with steam-powered society, and the book, you can tell from the first line, it has a lot of references and allusions to actual historical figures of the relevant time period of the 1800s or mid-1800s, including Charles Babbage, who is an engineer, an inventor, who created what he called the Difference Engine, a kind of pre-computer computer that could do kind of complex mathematical calculations on its own automatically, and he at least conceptualized it, and there have been some difference engines built based on his designs. So this is a really interesting book for folks who are interested in steampunk, and this is kind of what led me to the kind of aesthetic, I guess, that we know as being associated with steampunk, that you can see even with the book with the metallic here around this eye, and which we'll see in this deck. So the deck features steampunk style, motifs, themes. So we can see on the back the suit symbols here, and the deck is rather shiny. So we can see the cups, pentacles, swords, and wands there. And in a steampunk deck, it's going to be full of gears and mechanical devices, lots of monocles and Victorian type dress mixed with kind of mechanical technology, right, as a marker of steampunk. So anyway, preamble. This deck had been on my radar for a long time, but really it was seeing the Czech version of this deck on two channels here on Tarot YouTube, which are Grün Eule and Wolf of Coins. I'll link their videos below. They both do more walkthroughs or flip-throughs of the deck, unboxing. So I'm not going to do a full unboxing. I ripped it open the second it arrived. But to show, I will show a little bit of it. So this is what put this deck on my radar that made me finally acquire the Steampunk Tarot. I do not speak Czech. This book is going to be completely useless for me. I can't read it, unfortunately. And it looks like it's got a lot in there. It's quite a large book. But I can't read the book. But there is a Steampunk Tarot app, and that has a lot of the book contents as I understand it. I haven't downloaded it or anything yet, but if I'm interested, I can go there. And it's a very, very Rider-Waite-Smith system deck, so I'm very comfortable with not being able to read the guidebook. That's completely fine. So why get the Czech version of the deck as opposed to the English version of the deck? Well, Czech version has this beautiful copper gilding on it, which really suits the back of the deck perfectly, and the general kind of color scheme. It's a very dark deck, and the copper fits the theme and the art perfectly, and the English version of the deck does not have the copper gilding. This Czech version of the deck is also larger than the standard, so to compare a card from this Czech version with a standard, this is a Rider-Waite-Smith Centennial, you can see it is quite a lot larger there, both wider and taller. And some of these illustrations are quite detailed, so not having the greatest eyesight, the larger cards also were appealing to me. And so I ordered the deck when I found out that the Czech version was available on eBay, and it actually was listed in Canadian currency at a lower price than what the English language version would have cost me to purchase. I did have to pay a bit of shipping, but not very much. So when I saw that it was actually $2 cheaper to get this beautiful gilded version as opposed to the mass market English version, I went for it right away, and I'm so glad I did. To share a few of the features of this deck that, aside from the general aesthetic, I guess, and the steampunk theme that appealed to me so much, a few kind of characteristics of the deck that really make this deck really special, in my opinion, is that I think that this deck does a really good job of simultaneously adhering quite closely to the Rider-Waite-Smith imagery and style while adding interesting additions and interesting thematic kind of elements that really do add something to reading the cards and add something to interpreting the meaning of the cards. So you can see, to pick a couple of examples, there's the Hierophant card here, trying to avoid the glare. So we can see a lot of the symbols that are familiar from Rider-Waite-Smith, like the keys, for example, the one figure in the center with the two listening down below, so the general kind of layout of the card is very familiar and very similar. But here, instead of the Pope image, or the overtly religious leader, institutionalized religious imagery that comes with the Rider-Waite-Smith and comes with so many other decks that draw on the Rider-Waite-Smith, we have a older, wise figure that you can tell is a teacher. He has an apple in his hand. Perhaps students have given him the apple in his hand, with his stack of books there, and the two young folks are listening and one's taking notes. So you get the sense of wisdom and tradition and learning from elders that are so much of the aspects of the Hierophant that appeal the most to me anyway, without the very overt institutionalized religious imagery built in there. So it's a nice departure, I think. Similarly, the Three of Pentacles, one of my favorite cards in this deck, very similar to the Rider-Waite-Smith in a lot of ways. You have one figure building in an archway in what looks like it could be a church or some other large building, constructing with the pentacles there while two others look on, just as you find in the Rider-Waite-Smith. But here you have very clearly the craftsperson doing the constructing, and they have their tools down at the bottom. You have a center figure who is looking at tarot cards, and they're cards from this deck, from the Steampunk Tarot deck that she's looking at there. And then on the right, you have this person looking at plans or blueprints. So you get very much straightforwardly Rider-Waite-Smith kind of typical interpretations of this card, given that the imagery is so similar, but you get a kind of really explicit nod to a kind of teamwork or work on a project, growth on a project that involves both, or not both, all of the kind of logistical and intellectual approach of the blueprints, the intuitive approach that the cards there suggest, and the skill and handiwork of the craftsperson who's assembling the wall. And I really like the way that those things are brought together there, all with the kind of hallmark steampunk style of clothing and backdrop. That makes this deck a really cool deck in my opinion. Something else that's kind of interesting about this deck for folks who haven't worked with it is that this deck is full of kind of references to itself and references to tarot, and there's tarot cards everywhere in this deck. So for example, we see in the Ten of Swords a very akin to the Ten of Swords in Rider-Waite-Smith, with the swords going into the back of the figure there, and there's a fire in the background, so you get a sense of finality in a lot of ways from this. But in front of him, he's reaching out his hand, and I'm not sure if it's visible, but he's reaching out his left hand there, and there is a card, and he's reaching for it, and that card is the Ten of Swords in a Marseille deck. So it's a card within a card, and there are so many of these in this deck. In the Justice card, for example, we see similar, again, very Rider-Waite-Smith reminiscent imagery of the scales, and she's weighing a feather against a stack of gems, but we see her throwing cards down as she does so, or dropping them, and they're very, very clearly cards from this deck. So there's the Eight of Swords there for sure, and I think some of the court cards as well that she's letting go of. So I'm really looking forward to looking at where all of these tarot references come in. One more we see in the Ten of Pentacles, happy family scene here, and the figure who's looking on from the foreground is holding a 10 of coins from a Marseille style deck. So very cool kind of referencing. And so it's a deck that really incorporates, is the Pentacles there, 7, incorporates a lot of Rider-Waite-Smith imagery, but which does so, I think, in a really neat way, both because of steampunk style just being so cool looking, and also because I think that this deck really adds new layers to a lot of these cards. I like this Three of Swords. I never like Three of Swords. I think the bloody heart is just not the best image, and it's certainly not an image that really aligns with how I think about Three of Swords when I think in a more elemental and numerological way of reading. But here I kind of like the Three of Swords disrupting the cogs in the machine here, right? Because there's a sense of a kind of disruption of thought, disruption of things as usual, disruption of the operation of the machinery, right? Throwing a wrench in the works, so to speak. And that, for a meaning for a Three of Swords, I can really get behind, I think. I really like the happy bartender in the Nine of Cups. And I always thought that the Rider-Waite-Smith Nine of Cups, he kind of looked like he might be a bartender. So I like that that's kind of made quite explicit in this deck as well. There are no shortage of cool cards to be shown here. One thing to note about the deck is that they have kept King, Queen, Knight, Page, I believe, but the genders of the court cards they're predominantly women appearing folks, not exclusively, but they haven't done, for example, all male figures as knights or all female figures as pages. So there's a mix there, which is really great. I like when they're all mixed in that way. That works to me. To find a few more, I think that the aces in this deck are really beautiful, just all of them. This is the Ace of Cups. Again, quite Rider-Waite-Smith, but just in a steampunk style that adds something really neat to the deck. There are a lot of elemental and astrological imagery and associations in the deck. So if you are astrologically inclined or elementally inclined in reading, then that can be an appealing aspect as well. The Ace of Wands, all of the aces, I think, or not the Ace of Cups. The Ace of Pentacles also has the hand holding the pentacle as well. So more Rider-Waite-Smith imagery, more card imagery. Again, we see the figure in the background consulting the cards in the Four of Wands. So really just a great deck, and I will say I have seen the English version of this deck in person before. It's beautiful also. I really like the art in this deck. I do like the cardstock in this one a bit better, though. It seems a bit sturdier compared to, it's not as quite as sturdy or firm, I guess, as this is a US Games deck. But it's close. It's close. It has a bit more of a gloss. I like matte cardstock personally, but this is not glossy in a way that I would find to be a problem. I will say that the gilding looks great. The corners with this deck, because the corners have black, I'm not going to be able to show it really, but there is already a bit of scuffing on the front, but that really doesn't bother me, and I like my decks to look like they're well used and well loved anyway. And the copper gilding for me is worth it. So this is the deck that I was happy to have for my birthday this year, and I'm really looking forward to working with it, and I will share an update perhaps in more of a review style once I have. So thanks for watching. Have a good one.